finding the route.
Yeah, it's not obvious. I went to the first one.
Kenny, can you see the room next door? Is that
I guess we discussed restoration in the other morning
so I
session.
guess we need to wait for
No.
longer. I don't need to start too late.
I think many people are still actually down there.
Yeah.
I think even the big room is not filled up yet.
Our colleague is ringing the bell now, so like in school. In school I would prefer to reward the early students that come on time, but the ring is just belling, so let's wait a bit for the rest.
So there's no chocolate for the
It's a star.
It's a good sign of the catering,
It's
exactly.
warm though here.
Get another sticker.
It's warm, huh?
Students.
or bad.
Yeah, fresh air is always good.
Opening the windows for.
Yeah? Go for it.
They're open. They tell too much. Push it back. Some air.
Some nice Brussels fresh air. Sorry.
At least it doesn't smell like manure today.
Sorry.
Yesterday it smelled like manure in the European
Well, that was
quarters.
nice. That was actually nice. I found it like going back in my memories to the villages with manure. It's better than diesel
I mean,
fumes.
yes, that changes from cows. That's
Yeah.
I found it good.
Yeah, manure is better than diesel, you're right. Much better. To breathe at least.
Well, then yeah, it was really yesterday.
Yes,
We're in a village.
Ah, voilà. But you might have got lost.
no.
So they're taking really well to
Now the room will fill up with all the fans of Sabien.
This is a gender imbalanced panel.
I
How do you
love
feel?
it.
Yeah.
in charge of that.
I'm happy I'm not the only one with some
We always need some
good
mixed.
inspiration.
Should we start? No, not yet.
Connect again because I remember our first event we did on the nature restoration row. It was a virtual one. You were also one of our speakers.
Okay, very nice.
Yes.
Let's talk after the session. Yeah.
So, good afternoon and welcome to this session. My name is Evelyn Underwood. I head the Biodiversity and Ecosystems team at IEP, and we're also part of the Think Sustainable Europe Network Biodiversity Working Group, which is also represented here. And we're here to talk about climate resilience and nature restoration. And I have here a panel of really well-informed and eager panelists who are going to respond to my questions. And then I'm very much hoping that you are going to challenge them with your exciting questions. Challenging and exciting questions, that's what we need. So before I start, just to explain quickly what we'll do, I will introduce each of the panelists one by one. They will make a first statement in response to the main question of our session. Then they will respond to some more detailed questions. Then we'll open up for questions from the audience. We'll have a good 20 minutes for that. We also have online participants as well with us, I hope. So from your side, you can log on to Slido using the QR code. Or obviously for those in the room here, you can raise your hand when it comes to asking questions. Please, everybody, respect the fact that we do have online participants. So wait until you receive the microphone and speak clearly when you ask your question. Right, so today in this session, we are focusing on the urgent need to increase our climate resilience and adaptation, and on the proposed EU nature restoration regulation that you've heard a lot about already this morning. The first European climate risk assessment clearly showed that our national climate adaptation plans and policies are not sufficient to deal with what climate change is already throwing at us, and that there's a real requirement for urgent action. The European Environment Agency emphasized that incremental adaptation is not sufficient in many cases, and urgent action may be needed even where the risks are not yet critical, and we know that there are many risks that are already critical. Because many measures to improve climate resilience need a long time, and restoration needs a long time. At the same time, as we all know, and we've heard, the governments of the EU are failing to agree on the nature restoration regulation, despite it having been through tough negotiations and compromises in the discussions, in the trilogues, and despite the Parliament approving the final text, and of course previously the government majority being there to approve the final text. The EU Environment Commissioner pointed out that without that regulation, we are missing a key tool to meet our targets in the EU climate law. If the nature restoration proposal does become law, the member states will be facing the challenge of planning their national restoration measures and ensuring policy coherence and synergies with all then other national and EU commitments. And they need to, of course, work out how to pay for it, whilst addressing the knowledge gaps of what they would need to do to restore their habitats and species. There are key things that we still don't know. I will take the chair's prerogative to make my 3 points for today, because IP have also worked on this issue, and then I will shut up for the rest of the time. So 3 of our key messages on this issue. We emphasize that it needs a strong participation and an inclusion of civil society in the decision-making process, and particularly here, the land and water managers, i.e. the farmers and the foresters, are going to have to deliver a lot of this restoration. Obviously, finding sufficient funding is key, but that requires a key role for the private sector investment, because public funding will not be enough. And it requires a robust framework for monitoring and reporting. Now, all of this assumes that we will have a regulation, so that topic obviously will be part on the agenda today. But to start off, I will be asking our panel members to address the overarching question. What will it take to ensure that we meet our nature restoration and our climate resilience needs? And the key timelines here are what we do up to 2030, so super urgent, and then how we get to where we want to be in 2050. Okay, so turning to our panel, I have on my right side here Luc Bass. Luc is the director of the new Climate and Environment Risk Assessment Centre here in Belgium. It was set up by the Belgian government after the devastating floods of July 2021, which those of you who live here in Belgium will well remember, and the publication of Belgium's first national security strategy at the end of last year. This new centre aims to inform and inspire resilience strategies across Belgium and Europe. So I think, Luc, you are in the right panel session. Before that, Luc was heading coordination networks and strategy at the European Environment Agency, and many of you will know him best in his role as the director of the IUCN European Regional Office. And of course, in that role, he was also representing IUCN towards the European institutions. So, Luc, please give your response to our question.
Shall I use this, or should I speak up?
Yes, no.
Or is it needed for the online participation?
Yeah,
Okay.
please do.
Thanks for having me, by the way. And also thanks for having me first, because honestly, for me, the big context of everything we're discussing now and in this session is actually the European Climate Risk Assessment. I think that is a bit of the framework. But I think it's either alphabetical or it's because of the Belgian presidency that I go first. And so I also will not steal away the points from Elena on the UCRA too much. But of course, it's an incredibly important framework also for this new center that is actually kicking off its first national climate, but also biodiversity risk assessment, because we will take those two try to take those two up at the same time in that first risk assessment for Belgium, starting hopefully in May if all the administrative hurdles have been taken. The center is deliberately not only a climate risk assessment center, but a climate and environment risk assessment center. It is because we want to look at the interlinkages. And for us, the baseline to start from is an exercise that we're just about to finish, and which we will present on the 22nd of April at our launch event, for which you're all invited. So reach out if you want to get a seat, because they're limited. But we will then present what the downscaling of the planetary boundary concept means for Belgium. It's not an easy exercise, but other countries have done it. Belgium had not done it yet. The Flemish region has done an exercise in that sense. So that will be a bit of our bottom line. Okay, where are we transgressing these boundaries? For climate and for biodiversity, we don't honestly need a confirmation. We know that we are. The question is where, how, in which sense, which sectors are most affected, and so on and so forth. Of course, to do what we are supposed to do and to make sure that the nature restoration plans do include resilience and adaptation. By the way, I think if it's not, then neither of the two will be good. Neither a restoration plan will be good if it doesn't, and neither resilience or adaptation plans will be if they don't. So I think it's a given, but the way to do it needs to be well informed. And I think we've been struggling in Europe at large by being well informed of what to do, where, how, and when, and how to have these scenarios. Maybe on the hazards, we are getting there closer with the different scenarios on the hazards, climate hazards, for example. For biodiversity, that assessment into the future and what this biodiversity loss means is already less known. There's some great reports recently coming out, one from the UK, just to name a non-EU member state, but the UK has done a lot of work there, incredible work on nature risk and the financial sector. But I think there we need an extra push. So it's an independent center, I need to emphasize this. So we are in the government, in the federal government, but we are independent. We have a scientific board that will kind of peer review and advise us on our main results. It will not be on everything, but on our main output. And of course, the most important part of the USP, the unique selling point of the center, is that we have a mandate to advise the National Security Council, which is, as far as I know, in Belgium for sure, but I think largely not so common that we get that opportunity. The Belgium National Security Strategy, and I think many others in other countries have included environment degradation and climate change as potential security threats. We will have to describe those based on our analysis and also translate. And I think sessions like today, we don't have to convince each other of extra action or about the nature restoration law having to be adopted. I think these are more training sessions for us than to gather the arguments to go out and talk to those that are maybe not yet on board or don't understand why it's so important. And so the center will try to help on doing this and also translating it into a security context. We will have, I'm going to close, is that what you want to say? So I'll close with the fact that we have very broad assessments existing. We have financial impact measured, but it often stays very macroeconomic. Sometimes it goes into sectors, but I think we'll have to get it more localized for people to really understand what it means, what is the potential loss, or what is the potential cost of no action, not only on mitigation, because that has been done, but on adaptation. So make it concrete. This is what we'll try to do at the center, and I think we'll all have to do even better to get the narrative in the right direction and to get public, but also those sectors that feel they are threatened, convinced that it's actually in their own interest to advance and to understand those risks and therefore invest in adaptation, in resilience, and of course in nature restoration.
Thank you. So I'm really pleased to have here Elena Višnar Balinkowska. She is heading the Climate Adaptation Unit in the European Commission's DG Climate Action. And this is the unit that is at the forefront of the EU Green Deal. One of the units, but one of the key ones, because they are responsible for mainstreaming adaptation and resilience in EU policy and funding. They have responsibility for the EU's climate strategy, and they are heavily involved in the funding and the policies that are supporting climate transition, forest monitoring, soil monitoring, the Horizon mission on adaptation, which is an important lever with civil society and research. The EU climate risk assessment is the file that was under this unit. And they are also played a key role in the development of the nature restoration proposal. So without more stumbling from me, Elena, over to you.
Thank you very much. So what does it take to get to our 2030 and 2050 ambitions? First of all, it's very good to be leading this team for 6 years, because this means that I have been already part of evaluating a framework, developing a new framework, and the hard work and non-sexy work, by the way, of implementation. And that's where, let's say, the success or the failure is being played. I think we have all the pieces now to prepare for the 2030 ambition. It means we internationally, and this probably went unnoticed, but at the COP28, the parties have adopted what is called the Belgium work program, or the global goal on adaptation. Allow me to use this shorthand. And this is, for the international level that is normally heavily negotiating about every comma, a very good text, because it does, include a very clear intent in the different thematic areas for adaptation. And there is a very important part on ecosystems and nature-based solutions. And we will have to work internationally also, because there is the whole plan to develop indicators. We will have to work with the global level also on these indicators. Now, second, we know very well where we are as the Union, because the European Climate Risk Assessment shows the emperor naked. So we are unprepared for the risks that are out there, and indeed, as you, Evelyn, said, even the risks that are critical, there are not even, let's say, intentions to address them. Third, we have done a very thorough review of where national preparedness is. And this is in December. You can read into different situations in member states, how they are prepared for climate change. And this is done under the European climate law that sets the duty to adapt. So every single member state has to progress in its adaptation efforts. Every single member state has to have a national adaptation strategy, national adaptation plan, has to have tools to measure and to progress. So fourth, we need, and I think this is the most difficult one, we need to raise awareness. And I'm very grateful to Evelyn that you spoke of climate resilience. We are trying to get rid of the word climate adaptation. And I'm telling it to you because climate adaptation in terminology sense means you're just adjusting to a reality. You can passively, observe something, you can be a bystander, and it will happen. In German, Anpassung. I think it's a very similar term in Flemish and you name it. So here we really want to have this more agency, triggering active term of climate resilience or societal preparedness. And let me finally end of what do we need? We need a lot of courage. Every day I hear from even colleagues, we should not go doom and gloom, this is paralyzing people, etc. I've been working for 5 years for Janez Potočnik, and I know in the introductory remarks today to this conference, he was very clear. We need to put things plainly on the table. There are not anymore sort of circling around the issues. We shouldn't be paralyzed by uncertainties or by the layers of disclaimers, oh, we are not sure enough, etc., by the scientists. The reality is daunting and it's quite gloomy, but if one moves ahead quite quickly, now there is a good chance that we can build the societal preparedness and resilience we need.
Thank you very much. Now, moving on to Adeline Rochet. She is the program manager for the Corporate Leaders Europe group, a role she took on in August of last year. Now, CLG Europe is a group of business leaders in Europe who have committed to a climate-neutral Europe and to showing leadership in sustainability. It's convened by the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, but Adeline is with us here in Brussels. She works here. The group has published a number of widely disseminated statements supporting an ambitious nature restoration regulation, and they highlight the need for a strong regulatory framework in order for businesses to be able to invest. And this is really needed because we know that the public funding out there is not enough. So over to you, Adeline.
Thank you very much, and likewise, thanks a lot for inviting me. Thanks a lot for organizing the summit, because I think it's an important moment and, well, particularly timely with the latest developments between farmers' protests, nature restoration law, deadlock, and of course the very impactful release of the EU climate risk assessment, which I think we are still continuing to digest, everybody who read it. So the Corporate Leaders Group, as you said, is a group of business leaders who are really actively engaging in climate neutrality. We also believe in nature positive action, trying to embed together climate and nature response. And if there is one thing that businesses don't like, it's uncertainty. And I think one of the key elements to trigger the necessary private investment and that businesses are really asking for is certainty. We, for instance, recently released a letter that was supported by over 100 businesses across Europe in favor of at least 90% ambition on emissions reduction by 2040. And why do these businesses commit to that? Even if for some of them it's very important effort, it's because that they know this is coming, so they really want to have a roadmap and some clarity and see where this is going and at what pace, so that they can start investing themselves and they can also start getting investment from institutional investors, financial institutions, and etc. I think one of the big gaps, but that Europe is currently very active in trying to solve, is on not only understanding the risks associated to climate disaster and biodiversity loss and environment degradation, but to monetize it, also to make the economic case. Because it's one thing to know that if you invest that amount, you will make that profit. But it's another once you start seeing the numbers of how much will it cost to repair such and such infrastructure? What are the actual risks of operation being stopped because of a major catastrophe or having supply chains, global supply chains disrupted? And I think that this work on clarifying the financial risk to start investing in de-risking and de-risking investment is something that businesses really call for. Importantly, so as you said, there is quite a lot of work in the UK also on that nexus between nature, climate, and finance. We actually, the CISR actually has a Center for Sustainable Finance, really trying to progress the understanding and knowledge on that. Europe is looking in that direction, but it's really essential so that another thing is that private investment also are triggered if you have some public backing to it. That doesn't mean subsidies. That means that if you have a financial framework that is adapted to de-risking the investment with guarantees, with spending finance, etc., of course that ensures that you will upscale the solutions that are needed. And this is something I truly believe that we need to mainstream resilience and climate adaptation in all aspects of European policy, but that also means that you need to have that in mind when you talk about multi-annual financial framework, of course, but when you talk about industry strategy, we don't link that to the needs, the infrastructure needs, or the public procurement that we need for a future-proof Europe, and it needs to also go beyond the usual stage of people who have an interest or have some knowledge on climate and nature, but really go into the crowd of people who are really looking into industry competitiveness so that they themselves integrate those important dimensions to their own practice. And I believe I've reached the 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you. So, representing the environmental sector, we have Sabien Leemans with us here today. She is the Senior Biodiversity Policy Officer at the WWF European Policy Office, and she's been really working hard on the nature restoration proposal for at least the last 2 years, probably more, to advocate for an ambitious regulation. She also chairs the European Habitats Forum, which is the group of the leading European nature conservation organisations, and they've worked together a great deal on this nature restoration file. She actually has a degree in forestry and has lived in Indonesia, which I didn't know before, so little interesting detail for you. And there, it's over to you, Sabien.
Thank you, Evelyn, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. It's true that together with other environmental NGOs, we have been advocating for legally binding restoration targets for nature and for climate for a long time. And this work intensified at the start of this commission, actually, when the commission launched the EU Green Deal. And that's almost 4.5 years ago, I think. And why were we calling for these legally binding targets? It's because actually already in the biodiversity strategy to 2020, there was already a commitment, a political commitment, but a voluntary commitment that in the EU we would restore 15% of degraded ecosystems by 2020. And this didn't happen. Why? Because we feel that politically binding agreements, voluntary agreements, they do not work. We need legally binding frameworks. So for us, the question what we need to have in place to reach the restoration and climate resilience targets, it's clearly this legally binding framework that would set clear and time-bound targets for nature restoration. And of course, for the moment, we don't have it yet, unfortunately. It was discussed already extensively this morning, so sorry if some of the messages you have heard already. But actually, the nature restoration law is going to give us this, and it is actually quite a groundbreaking and historical legislation, because I think it's from the Habitats Directive, which was adopted in the 90s, that we had a new legislation that could really impact the way how we use our land and sea area in Europe. And of course, we are now very disappointed with the current state of affairs, with Hungary, as you heard this morning, quite suddenly withdrawing their support for the trilogue agreement, making that there is now no majority anymore in the council at a time where this should have been, and this is really important, just a rubber stamping, a formal issue. Normally, environmental NGOs or other lobby groups, I think, after a trilogue agreement has been reached, our work is done. Because what follows is just the adoption in Parliament and in Council, and this is just the formalities. All the negotiations have been done at that point. So even for people who are not interested, or policymakers who are not interested in the nature restoration law as such, this situation is very worrying, because it puts into question our ability to agree on new legislation, also on other files, in a period just a few months ahead of the EU elections. So what kind of message are we giving to the more than 1 million citizens who supported us in the ask for an ambitious nature restoration law? It's also very bad for the EU's credibility at the global level, because the EU was very instrumental in getting an ambitious agreement adopted at the CBD COP, the Global Biodiversity Framework. And one of the arguments of the EU was, look, we have this legal proposal for a nature restoration law. We are really going to implement this in our region as well. And this is giving a very, very bad message internationally. It was already said, it's not only Hungary. There are several member states who are not supporting the law. It's Italy, Poland, Sweden, Finland, Belgium, Austria, and the Netherlands. So it's not at all only Hungary. I think all those countries and all those member states have a responsibility now to do the right thing and to have this deal agreed as soon as possible. And why? It has been said already, but it's very clear that if we do not start restoring nature, with unfortunately flooding, droughts, fires becoming also in Europe almost the new normal, we will need to start bringing nature back if we want to increase our climate resilience. And the climate resilience assessment has clearly shown that nature restoration is not optional, it's really a necessity. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, but really importantly, we have someone here in the front line, at least from government terms, Barbara Chemelova. Sorry. Her long-term job is as an analyst in the Czech think tank on climate and international issues, but she is currently working at the Ministry of the Environment of the Czech Republic exactly on this question of how the Czech government is going to implement this expected nature restoration law. Last year, when the Czech government, the Czech Republic had the presidency of the Council, she was also instrumental in helping prepare the EU's positions and their negotiations at the UN Convention on Biodiversity COP15, where these global targets were set, notably the restoration target that you've already heard about. Barbara is a specialist in the protection of biodiversity, sustainable agriculture, and generally the relationship between people and nature. So looking forward to hearing from you, Barbara.
Thank you very much, Evelyn, and many thanks to the IEP colleagues for organizing this event and for your invite. It's a really pleasure to be here today. It's such a good company. Good afternoon to everyone. As Evelyn already mentioned, I work at the Czech Ministry of Environment, and I'm directly in charge of preparation of the National Nature Restoration Plan. So I will take the liberty to bring a little bit of the national perspective on the table. The preparation of this nature restoration plan is in full swing in Czech Republic, despite the current circumstances. So the scientific evidence is pretty clear about the fact that restoring nature is really a crucial part of the solution towards climate resilience and safeguarding livable future as such. But to answer the introductory question, I would like to step back a little bit and look what is actually our motivation for nature conservation, nature restoration. Doing it for nature and biodiversity and climate is certainly a positive motivation, but pretty frankly, we are doing it for ourselves. Nature has a potential to restore its ecosystems, but we humans, we really need a safe space for living and for well-being, and we need it now. Take the example of Chernobyl, for instance. Nature is thriving there at the moment, but it's impossible for human beings to live there. So it's all because the nature is not able to answer quickly. It really takes time for natural processes to get back to a certain level of equilibrium, but it would be too late for our human society. So time is really a key ingredient for us and a limiting factor. Extreme weather events are more and more frequent, more and more severe, more and more unpredictable. And we have to get used to it, and we really have to become efficient, even in times of high uncertainty. But how to achieve that? Ecosystems and contexts are really diverse, and there is apparently no silver bullet. Of course, we need robust data, build evidence, and create certain knowledge system that will serve as a framework for effective policies and action. But we are not changing only the ecosystems. We have to aim at changing the society as such. Therefore, facts alone will not save us in this case. We have to consider a whole different set of factors, like various interests, various values that are entering and influencing the processes and that are really shaping the debate at the moment. We have to really unveil them and to address them very openly. In order to achieve this, we have to develop and really internalize some innovative approaches to collaboration, to making everyone heard, and we really have to start talking across different facts, different interests, and different values. Based on that, we can start developing some forward-looking solutions that will bring us on a pathways to desired transition. I will repeat again. It is all taking place in the times of very unprecedented changes. It's very challenging, and there are really many uncertainties we have to deal with. For instance, there is a question: what is actually the desired state of ecosystems we want to achieve? In many cases, it's not possible to simply return back to the pre-industrial era, and because the circumstances have changed so dramatically. We really want the ecosystems that are diverse, ecosystems that can deliver various ecosystem services, but we also need ecosystems that are resilient to external shocks like heat waves in cities, extreme events. And this will require a really whole new approach and methods in coming future. Even though we frame our efforts by the year 2030 and 2050, we actually have to look beyond this into future, which again brings responsibility to set up the processes right. And this might be something that is very abstract for many people and even overwhelming at times. However, we have to simply accept that there are many things we don't know, things that are constantly changing. There will be many pitfalls and error on our way, but the one thing is clear: we really have to focus on implementation. We have to start working with knowledge that is and resources that are available at the moment, and we have to be creative and resourceful in order to bring nature back and build resilience of ecosystems and society as such. So it was pretty general, but as the introduction.
Thank you very much. Now, my panelists have done a very good job at responding to my questions already, individually or together. So I'm going to ask everyone to keep your answers now as brief and specific as you can for these questions, and I'm not going to go through all of them. So I'm going to start by addressing my first question to Elena, first of all. So could you really just make it clear to us, do we really need nature restoration to get climate resilient? And do we really need a new EU regulation for this?
You can also use the other mics.
Yeah, absolutely. So the answer to your first question is absolutely yes, because we can reach the net zero and still be on a dead planet. And that's very important to mention, because in the debate on climate neutrality and the net zero, there is really a strong belief that this will bring us to a completely better society. Nevertheless, we have still the impacts that will be out there, because our greenhouse gas emissions represent a small share, and because the processes that are unleashed in this very complex Earth system will continue to heat the planet. So the first response is a very bold yes, because nature restoration is a no-regret measure. And reacting to Barbara, even if the climate change has already degraded some of the ecosystems, it's even more argument to protect nature, to prepare it for the next shocks. Now, to the second question, do we need specific EU regulations? Having now the experience of actually two instances in this week, we had two councils. One that has postponed the nature restoration law because the qualified majority couldn't be reached, and the second that decided almost on unanimity to relax some of the green measures in the common agricultural policy. So the signal in terms of politics has been out there. The farmers have been in the streets, and for nature restoration, we probably need the disaster to invite itself to the street. Now, being a lawyer, I can tell you all the ingredients of work are out there. We don't need an additional EU regulation to tell us, that would be called climate resilient regulation or law, etc. We really need to move to the implementation, and we need to use every single revision of a major law to mainstream climate adaptation. Let me explain. Spatial planning or land use, these are really the make or break for climate adaptation. Spatial planning lies with national authorities. There, Europe has nothing to do. But in our communication on managing climate risks, we have flagged it as an important matter. You, national authorities, if you take wrong decisions for climate resilience, when you decide on your spatial planning, it's your problem. It's not that Europe should then come and secure if there are wildfires or floods as a result of essentially making the riverbed concrete. So I believe through this and through the different levels we have, like the mission on adaptation, where we work a lot with local authorities, we can move the agenda much faster than spending now 2-3 years of our times of drafting, justifying a piece of law that at the end can get stuck because we are, unable to face the short-termism that is out there in the, at the political level.
Sabien?
Just to respond,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, I wanted to react to the point that when there is no legislation, then of course businesses say there's no certainty, there's no investment in certainty, and so on and so forth. That said, I think there's other instruments to provide that. I think you also alluded to that earlier. We have to account better, and we need a real accounting system for investing in nature. If that's not there, even the nature restoration law would not create it. So I think that's something that is still a crucial element. And you could argue, and now I think sometimes we have to start talking in different terms of the community outside that is maybe not understanding. And so for example, why not talk about a single market for nature-based solutions? I think we'll have to explain in language that is not being discussed in this room, but outside of this room. So that could be one thing. Another thing that I'm just now trying to get some steam into our debate that is not just repeating what we always repeat, but one could say, look, talking about the economy and AAA rating and so on and so forth, why not go for a RRR rating? And of course you can imagine what one of the R stands for, but if you look at an economy that's investing in restoration, that would be higher up the mark. That said, all of these measures will always, at the short term, have, and if you like it or not, there will be some parts that on the short term we may lose out. And so we have to get better at getting the compensation in the right place, in the right way, and that's where we get, hopefully, the landowners, the farmers, the water managers, we can get them on board if that's done more intelligently. That said, and we talked about public funding, there's not enough public funding. Yes, one could argue that. We need the private funding, but there's a lot of public funding that can be rechanneled. It's not just additional adaptation funding or additional restoration funding. It should be integrated in existing budgets. It's not extra money. And then we come to the extra money. Yes, it's a redistribution issue. So that's the second R in the debate, a redistribution of that public funding, but also to create potentially more of that where it's needed. And the last one, of course, and that's we haven't discussed, but it's also a very tricky one, is the reduction part. The third R in your RRR rating. You need to have a clear reduction on your emissions, on your consumption, on your impact, and you need to measure it as well. So why not think in kind of those terms? But, of course, that's more easily said than done. You'll need to work closely with the economic models. We will do that for the risk analysis that we do. We're talking to our Federal Economic Planning Bureau to see how they can work with us to come with better numbers, more specifically, more sectoral, more concretely, so it really speaks and it projects into those models that are existing, but it adds on your climate and environment or your biodiversity loss risk. And if we don't do that, I think we will not be able to explain no regret measures properly, and we will not be able to get the real cost of no adaptation measured versus the investment that we need. So we'll need to translate it in economic terms, and I think that's what you said as well.
Great. So on that point, we turn to the really big question that's being asked by the critics of this legislation, namely, how will this all be funded? And I'd like to ask Adeline, you have the microphone if you're on the spot, to respond to this question, because there is this question, do we need and how do we need to leverage private funding?
I think I started hinted at it probably too early in the discussion, but yes, there is of course strategic use of public funds from all levels of governance, but de-risking investments in nature restoration and in climate adaptation in resilience is of course something that is of mutual interest both for the private sector and for the public sector. De-risking investment doesn't mean direct subsidies on it. There is a whole variety of instruments that can be mobilized. There is also, and I think that the point that you made about the rating and how do you account for the value that you add or the value that you lose, and how do we reflect I really don't like the word, but I don't have a better one. How do you reflect negative externalities and the price and on the market? It's also something of the essence. If you don't reward the most beneficial solutions and products, let's say, and if you don't add more cost, I'm not just talking about, I know that there is carbon pricing, and it's been a long story, and there would be a lot to be said about the good and the bad of the carbon pricing, but it goes beyond that. If you don't penalize the most damaging, or if you don't make polluters pay, ultimately, of course, the cheapest product, the cheapest service will always have a market advantage. So the level playing field in the European single market today doesn't incentivize the solutions, the services, the products that go in the direction of nature positive, climate neutral economy. So so how do you finance also the transition to such a system? It's by having market conditions and market instruments that are fit for sustainability, which is not entirely the case. I briefly mentioned public procurement a bit earlier. We estimate that more or less 70% of the EU Green Deal would be implemented at the local level, so regional city level. This is a huge potential if you frame your tenders and your procurement in a way that incentivizes and rewards sustainable solutions. Then that's a massive uptake for green demand. That's a massive lever to really upscale and deploy the solutions that are beneficial for the planet and the economy. So there are also instruments on the market side of things that can finance the transition.
Thank you. Great. Now, okay, yes. I would like to just throw the question to Elena and Barbara, because Lucas raised this question. There is public funding. There is possibility of using public funding better and mobilizing more. Do you have a quick point to make on that?
Luke is right. Huh? We can use the public funding in a more efficient way, and at least from the resilience perspective, you should not add vulnerability. You should not increase vulnerability of a certain system. You shouldn't undermine the system resilience of somebody else. I mean, this should be some basic principles that the public intervention backed by public funding should be guided by. So,
climate proofing. Thank you. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, just very quickly. In Czech Republic, funding instruments and mechanisms for nature restoration and adaptation are part of the national budget. We are actually planning to do a very comprehensive analysis of other innovative sources of funding. Part of it will be also like a comprehensive analysis of and a revision of subsidies that are actually being provided by the Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Agriculture. Some of them might be contradictory and even harmful in terms of nature restoration.
I have already the mic, thank you. On the funding, when we discuss funding for nature restoration, I think it's very important to realize that this is an investment and not a cost. From the impact assessment that the Commission did, it's very clear every euro you invest in nature restoration has a return of 8 till 38, I think it was, euro, depending on which ecosystem you are looking at. This is very important, but of course, it is still an investment that you need to make, and the return does not come as money on the table. It's ecosystem services that are going through the society, and those are not necessarily the people who do the investment. So it's not like investing in renewable energy, etc., which is easier to have bankable projects and to have private funding, etc. So I think for nature restoration, it will always be an important part will always be public funding. And what we see is that for the moment, not only for nature restoration, but for biodiversity in general, there is a big funding gap. And to address this funding gap, probably very briefly, two main priorities. First of all, there's a lot of environmental harmful subsidies ongoing, which should be phased out and redirected. And the second part is that we think that only counting on the mainstreaming, on using CAP money and cohesion money, etc., to also contribute to nature is not sufficient and is not the whole solution. So we are also advocating for a dedicated nature restoration fund in the upcoming MFF discussions. And the nature restoration law actually gives us a little legal hook to start working on this if it gets adopted. Yeah, thank you.
Just a very quick reaction on integrating it into other plans. And you see sometimes examples where it starts very successfully. I think in Wallonia, and maybe someone from Wallonia is here who knows even more detail about it, but there was an inclusion in the recovery plan that was prepared, and as it went forward, other interests started to pop up, and in the end, there was no money in the adaptation plan and less in the recovery plan than originally was foreseen. So there is always a risk, but when it gets into, let's say, the hard economics of the government and those that are leading it, then and it stays there, then it's more powerful. So that's one quick point. And the other one that I wanted to make is, if you want to get the investments or the adaptive measures or the restoration done at the right time and the right place, we often forget that the insurance sector could actually play a big role there, because a lot of the investments still happening are not adaptive, are not including a nature element, and it could be a prerequisite from the insurance sector itself. Just like when you are a bad driver, you pay more for your insurance, right? If you're a bad investor and not including these resilient elements, then you will pay either more insurance or not even get one. So I think the insurance sector has a big role to play, and therefore the whole financial institutions. As the National Bank in Holland, for example, is already going much further in assessing their nature risk stuff. The European Central Bank is now looking at it, and we are, of course, trying to get our Belgian National Bank to be convinced. But there is always a lot of work to be done and a lot of arguments that you need to put on the table that are basically economic and not, unfortunately, if you like it or not, but not nature arguments.
Thank you. Exciting wealth of issues, but I think we really need to turn to your audience now. You've had patience. We're running over time. I will ask for questions from the audience now, and I look to my guide. Yeah.
Philippe Tulkens from the European Commission, DG Research, Innovation, Climate and Planetary Boundaries Unit. So, first, to the public, I hope you have realized that you have in front of you the European Commission speaking like that about the nature restoration law. Congrats. Huh? No, I mean, I'm part of it, but it's quite unusual, because we see the limits of our decision-making system, and we are ourselves frustrated. You described very well the crisis. That was just a comment. And I have a question for the Sustainable Corporate Leaders Group. Adaptation is fundamentally different from mitigation. So the group is known for the commitments on mitigation, but on adaptation, I'm not aware of what commitments they took for themselves. And actually, if they are good corporates, they are also selfish. So what are the commitments that they take within their activities? If you looked at the groups that are part of the corporate group, Amazon and others, I mean, those are very big players. What is the message with regard to what the leaders group can tell to this audience? If the states can't do it, what can corporate do?
So, as a disclaimer, first starting by a disclaimer, I work as a program manager for the Corporate Leaders Group. We are coalition and not a trade association, so I don't speak in the name of the members, but it's an important disclaimer. And to be totally transparent, for a very long time, the group has worked on climate issue, and the expanding or broadening the scope also to nature restoration and climate adaptation, as a matter of fact, came from the members, because they don't have all the same implication, but they do have some selfish interest in securing their own infrastructure, their own plants, their own assets. And they also they see also the value, and when I say value, I really mean return on investment of such activities. As a matter of fact, we published 6 months ago with IEEP a briefing titled "From Risk to Resilience, the Business Case of Investing in Nature," that presents some existing projects, living projects from some of our members' companies investing in nature restoration on their facilities and on their own sites, and explaining the benefits they see to it, and explaining the benefits it brings them in terms of also the community service it brings them, because by essence, we didn't really touch upon that dimension, but by essence, adaptation is very localized. We talk about global framework or general high-level framework, but it's really local project. And those companies, they invest locally also to have a good relationship with the communities around, because they want to have a good partnership, let's say, with people around who work, who contribute to their value chain, to their supply chain. So I would say that there are some examples. It probably doesn't progress fast enough, but also because of something very simple. We don't have a lot of ways of measuring companies' commitment to climate adaptation. There is a number of private initiatives, independent initiatives that measure and track the dedication of companies to climate neutrality, like SBTIs or Race to Zero, that each have their pros and cons, but that exists. We don't have really the equivalents for climate adaptation. And I must say, these are independent private initiatives, but maybe on certifying what is green and what isn't, there is also something that can be improved at the European level, that it's not directly telling a member states or a company what to do, but that contributes to that enabling framework, a bit like, well, the taxonomy has, the sustainable finance taxonomy hasn't been the easiest policy files either, but I think it was a very important element to give trust in what is a green investment. And even, again, you can discuss some of the flows of the end text, but in the end, that provides some visibility, that provides some clarity and some comparability. We lack those instruments, and in my own work, I wish I had more EU-backed certifications, label schemes to assess the seriousness of some companies, because it's also difficult sometimes to monitor and to measure what really is a good climate mitigation, a good climate adaptation, or a good nature restoration plan if you don't have those, let's say, publicly backed, research-backed frameworks.
Thank you. Next question. I have a follow-up question, if I may.
Yeah.
May I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah,
Eric?
please keep it short. Present your name and address it to one of the panel members.
Okay, so my name is Katrin Heeren. I work for the consultancy ICF, and a follow-up question to this very interesting one to Adeline for the Corporate Leaders Group. So in the context of ESG, it's often discussed that incentives for CEOs, instead of being only financially, should also be including ESG. So ESG can be enlarged and could also be including resilience and climate mitigation targets and avoided environmental destruction. So couldn't the Corporate Leaders Group take a good example and go ahead with that? Because then the CEOs would not only look at the shareholders' interest, but also at avoiding environmental impact to get their financial incentives.
So to be honest, I never thought about that idea, but thanks a lot for bringing it, because now I will discuss it internally with my colleagues and my members.
Thank you. This is all really interesting, but we are here to talk about the nature restoration regulation. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. My name is Martin Abel, and I work for Climate Think Tank, Association for International Affairs. I'm a colleague of Barbara's. And and I also appreciate the honesty from Ms. Višnar Malinovská about the need to address the spatial planning in particular, and the fact that it's actually not that is not one of the shared responsibilities. It's actually still exclusive for the member states, exclusive power of the member states. So yes, we cannot talk about restoration without talking about spatial plans. But I'm wondering whether you went far enough, because as you will know from your Slovak experience, as we will know from our Czech experience, very often there will be spatial plans which will not be put into reality because of the state of land ownership there. Okay, because we talked today very much about farmers, and this is very good. But from the Central and Eastern European experience, the farmers will not be those who will decide about this. It will be the landowners. And so I'm asking critically whether we can actually, whether it makes sense to have all these like nature restoration plans, the whole like European policy, without addressing this issue, because it's just not enough. It just doesn't seem enough to say, yeah, and you member states, you have a very fragmented land ownership. I mean, I know that you have 3 million landowners in the Czech Republic, but you have to deal with it, okay? So that's my critical remark. And now one short also question, a radical one, because I also want to be disruptive. I find that this is the right forum for this. So I want to ask and to any of you, if you think that that this kind of that the whole market incentive approach, to market-driven approach to nature restoration with incentives given to either the farmers or landowners will be enough. I'm asking whether we are not actually, whether we should not start talking and doing ideally land reforms where we would.
Okay, land reform. Thank you. So market-based incentives or
I
land
disagree.
reform?
Like what? No. Like I'm not. What are you saying? Like am I being irrelevant?
No, I just want you to finish your question.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So my question is simply whether it should not be part of an obligation on the part of the landowner,
So
rather than something that we have to incentivize the landowner to do.
Okay. Incentives versus regulation of land reform. Who would like to address this question?
I can come in because I know from where you are coming from. In Slovakia, by the way, there are 4.4 million apparently landowners, so that's quite challenging. And indeed, you have either a choice. You put an obligation on a landowner or on an authority, and you hope that the obligation will be carried out, or you actually nationalize and do a major land reform. And then it's much easier to carry out some of the large-scale measures. What we have tried to do for the Slovak RRP, and I was part of the team working on the Slovak RRP, was essentially the second case. We tried to go via the buying out of private-owned parts in national parks, the forests, in order to have that protected. And I still believe that was the good way. The second thing we really tried, and it was good with the previous government, is to do a land planning at the whole national level, and to subject the spatial plans, local spatial plans, to the overall land plan. Of course, it went wrong because, the local plans are subject to politics. The mayor, everybody wants to build, everybody wants. So, but I think the approach, the recipes for good approach are already out there. The only question is a political will, and, you carry on. Unfortunately, with the new Slovak government, we are in a sort of on hold with a couple of those measures.
Yeah, just a very quick reaction, because it's actually pointing at the very problem of everything here. It's all about property rights. It's about subsidiarity reality in Europe. You don't have a level playing field, but there's always a but to this. Depending from the country, one country to another, there's still a lot of public land. A lot of public land where at least the example can be given to accelerate, to do much more, which then hopefully can inspire the actual private landowners. So if you don't get it even running at the public level, that nut is even more difficult to crack. I mean, and that's a reality. I mean, it's just a subsidiarity issue, it's a property right issue, and it's where the rubber hits the road, really. But I think if the public lands would already be accelerating, then that would be good. And that's not even happening enough. So.
Maybe just one quick addition. I don't think, but that's probably not what you were aiming for, but I don't think it would be right if at EU level there would be a nature restoration law obliging and saying you need to restore this there, and so that's not how it is done, and I think that was the right decision. It gives a framework, it gives binding targets with a clear timeline for the member states, and then you need, of course, to have the process at national level or even regional level, and this has to be very participatory, although it is difficult, but otherwise there is no support locally for what you want to do. And this is very important in the context of the nature restoration law. And I think in some countries, when the Natura 2000 network was set up, this was done too top-down, and in many countries we still have the consequences of this, and you need to have a good balance. But of course, if you, that's why I was also pleading for sufficient funding to be able to, for some pieces of land, for instance, rewetting of peatland, you need to then, if the farmer is going to stop farming there, you need to be able to buy the land or to do land swaps, etc., etc. So this is important, but I think the participatory approach and trying to reach an agreement with the stakeholders will be very important. So the work is only starting when the nature restoration law is adopted.
Thank you. Can I ask if there's an online question or an audience that will follow up on this topic? So, participation, incentives for landowners, land reform. Anything online to flag? Okay.
Yes. So my name is Arthur ten Wolde, the director of Ecopreneur Europe, the European Sustainable Business Federation. We represent about 3,500 SMEs mostly, and we have supported both the Corporate Leaders Group and the WWF in this lobby for a nature conservation law. So my question is on incentives, because for our SMEs and our sustainable SMEs, one of the major problems for the whole Green Deal is the lack of a level playing field. So my question to you is, how is this for this sector, for this value chain, and what types of incentives do you think are needed and can be realized in the next years? Because that's obviously what is also here blocking the whole thing.
Incentives for SMEs. Would you like to say that one?
Thanks. I will try and give some answers. Of course, it's a very big topic because it is something new, and as Sabien said, there are some value chains or some, let's say, economic areas that have been around for a longer time. Let's say renewable energy. It's been now it's so profitable that you kind of no longer need the incentive for investors to really look into it. On nature restoration, the conversation is at a much earlier stage, and as I said, I think it's deeply local projects that we are talking about, or at least from what we see at the Corporate Leaders Group Europe level, it's really depending on some communities, on some specific ecosystems, and then locally, what will be an incentive or what will be generating more return on investment will depend a lot. But I think there are a number of discussions that are connected to this one. I know that's a conversation about how do you get, around carbon farming, and how do you reward farmers who have practices that enhance, improve the storing of long duration storage of carbon in their land and more sustainable agricultural practices. I'm not an expert in that area, but it's one of the things where we see that markets are really nascent, and that you can think about building more, building those markets more. And then it's about organizing markets. It's about a bit what I said earlier, but what are the certifications that you need? What are the price signals that you need? What are the demand creation instruments? What are the how do you monetize the risks, etc.? So I think on the market creation around sustainable, nature positive activities, we are still very much in an early stage, and there is a bunch. So if you have ideas, I think now is also a good moment to share them, to create some, because I sense, of course, it's a very multifaceted discussion, but to some extent, some of the resistance around the Green Deal in general and the nature restoration law in particular is also around fears that we will destroy what exists and change to new ways of doing, and change is often scary. If you can come up with some ideas that create more trust, more buy-in, more a vision that kind of creates a desire to go in that direction, that also helps. And I know that now it's more of something around the narrative and the vision that we want to put together, but now it's also a moment to give some of those innovative ideas that kind of make policymakers want to try this and see what benefit they can take from it.
If I may, just a very quick comment to your question, and I think it's something that must be kind of sitting everywhere, but there is a lot of risk assessments that are being done on many different fronts in the business community. So then you come to the European climate risk assessment, which gives a good direction. We should have better national ones. That's some part of what we will be doing. We will have to translate it and make it useful for those decisions to be made based on proper and good risk assessment. And that's beyond the hazards. It's really into vulnerability and exposure, and get that better clarified and at the national level and in more detail. It's not, much of that information is out there. It's just a matter of bringing it together and translating it and then being used. I don't think there's a lot of super heavy research that needs to be done. It's just a matter of bringing it together and then sharing it with those that need it. In this case, SMEs as well, local governments, and doing it, of course, with all levels of government. That collaboration, multi-level governance approach is absolutely crucial to give that certainty also in the business context.
Thank you. Can I ask everybody who still wants to ask a question to raise their hands, see how many there are? Okay, 4 more questions. We can manage that now. Are there any online? 1 question online, 5 questions. Okay. We did start late, so I don't want to cut off your coffee too much, but if we overrun by 5 minutes. Okay.
Okay, Steven Vinkier, Flemish Environment Agency, mostly busy with water resilience. But I've come to this training session with an open mind, and I come with maybe a difficult, detailed question. Is on restoration policy. How does this fit into the EU taxonomy? Is there an option there to explore, or I mean, because value for ecosystems were mentioned, value of water is something difficult because water is local, but it's not local because it's flowing and so on.
Thank you.
On taxonomy, what I can tell you is that there is the climate adaptation part of the taxonomy where nature-based solutions are given priorities in the technical screening criteria for substantial contribution. I think also in the category of do no significant harm, if you have a nature-based solution, that's definitely something preferable. We do hear from the businesses that they cannot turn they head around the technical screening criteria, that it's super complex. So we have issued a lot of frequently asked questions. So I think sometimes it's just excuses not to dig enough and not to do serious work enough. And it's nothing against the sustainable business that does it.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would burning to respond on the taxonomy? No. Okay, thank you. So
I think I need to make this point because it hasn't been made yet. And it's often that we want to reinvent the wheel when it comes to certain points and not even look at what's internationally available. And now I'm putting my ancient IUCN hat on, which is where IUCN has actually developed a global standard, which is of course still open for some flexibility, obviously, but only already following those criteria that are in that standard would give quite some certainty even into that taxonomy. Of course, it didn't make the taxonomy. The fact that nature-based solutions made the taxonomy is already a big win. But there is a standard. There was a standard that was even useful in Europe, but it hasn't yet been embraced. But it exists.
One more question. Thank you. Online, maybe. Yeah, let's take an online question.
Maybe to give the online attendance also a possibility. So at IEP, I'm voicing here as well, we are a research institute. We aim to work science-based, evidence-based. I have this question from Anonymous asking, which solutions do we have to overcome systematic denial and cognitive dissonance, both with the public and politicians, of importance, of the massive scientific evidence? Sabien, you've mentioned there's also 6,000 scientists supporting the nature restoration law. So now, will we have proper planning and implementation possible? Should the voice of the scientific community be, should it deserve a stronger voice in this policy making, in this planning? And if yes, how?
I think this is a good question that gets back all the time. Scientists have a voice to have, and this is why also the European Climate Risk Assessment is a unique piece of work, because it's a science to policy work, because there is often this sort of disconnect between the scientists and the policymakers. My invitation is really speak up, please speak simply to us, to policymakers as scientists, and please do not add all these disclaimers of what if and uncertainty and maybe or not. I mean, sometimes because of the precautionary principle, just be more alarmist, even if you don't feel it like this. 10 years ago, I still remember we have been looking at the sensitivity of the Earth system and the greenhouse gases and how much it heats the planet. You know, now even scientists said, oof, we have probably underestimated the sensitivity, and there are many tipping points that as a result have moved beyond sometimes salvation than 10 years ago. So I do take, and I apologize to all scientists, but I do take sometimes a point with the scientists. Sometimes they put me at despair.
I would like to add to what have been said, that it's really frustrating to see that this topic has been hijacked and it really became a target of a big disinformation campaign. And I think we really have to get the communication right and get the message across that nature restoration and climate resilience are not the interest or agenda of a small group of people, some green activists and politicians, but it's actually an interest of every single person, not only in the EU but globally. So it was also very nicely illustrated in the EU climate risk assessment in a very grim detail. So and I, like from my practical experience from the ministry, when we asked for participation in a preparation of nature restoration plans, there was such a huge interest from the general public, from academia, from the experts, from youth, and it really gives us a strong mandate and a message that what is resonating in the media cannot really necessarily reflect what the general public thinks and feels about the subject. So I'm slightly positive about this one.
Thank you for that message. So, yes, one more question. No more questions. Oh, okay. We have to get to coffee break in time. So what I will do now is I will tell the panel what I want them to do, and then we'll see. So what I want the panel to do at the end here is to give your brief key message that addresses these very real worries and fears and concerns about another green regulation, thinking about the opposition and the very many different views, as Barbara expressed so clearly. So it's not just a resistance to regulation. And then please, for the additional questions, just post them on Slido. So, Sabien, you ready to start?
Okay. Well, I will focus on the nature restoration law because that is, I'm not the only mother, but it's a little bit like my baby. But there's many there fighting for it. It's not just another piece of environment legislation that is done and that we do to have additional administrative burden and to no. This is, to put it dramatically, it's not for nature, but it's for us, for the whole society, because in the end we all depend on healthy ecosystems. The climate risk assessment report has clearly, very clearly shown this again. So it's just, I mean, if we don't react, then we will face a lot of consequences, and the farmers actually will be among the first, and they are already feeling the impacts of dry summers, of flooding, etc. So not reacting is not an option, I think.
Thank you. I've been active in various positions in Brussels for the past 15 years, and if there is something I learned is that sometimes the best way to get a message across is that it's carried by different actors with different framing, different starting points, but all landing on the same. And this is why we are engaged as Corporate Leaders Group Europe on nature restoration, maybe trying to convey a message that is not exactly the same as the one from NGOs, let's say, but going in the same direction. And what we have tried doing, again with the support from IEP, is really to showcase that the success stories of nature restoration, what happens when a company locally invests in nature restoration, what it brings to the community, what it brings in terms of jobs, what it brings in terms of local ecosystems, what it brings for the climate, what it brings in terms of resilience locally. And we will definitely continue to carry that message that where it's happening already, nature restoration actually doesn't harm farmers, but rather really benefits economies at large. And we will continue to carry this. Hopefully that will be a way of also to create the necessary trust and create the necessary buy-in into that law. And more generally, climate resilience at large.
Thank you very much. I'll have to do nature restoration myself because I became a proud owner with my husband of a small plot of forest. So it will be not only, you know, the policy side, but I will really have to endure it. So the message is the following. We always have different names for different things at the, you know, higher level, but when it comes to the ground, it's always the same. So if nature restoration and climate resilience do work together, we have, you know, everybody wins, everyone. And so what we really need to do now is to roll up the sleeves. The Czechs are showing probably the way. They are already having a plan without the legislation in place. Well done. And really engage and work together without, you know, these separate boxes.
Yeah, I'll be short. We have to connect risk with action. And we can take a lot of lessons from risk assessments in other fields that do lead to action. And the one most famous now at the moment is the huge increase in investment in defense, because there is a big risk. Even the risk is not 100% certain. Now we are in a climate and environment risk that is 100% certain, but we don't seem to act enough. So bottom line is we need to start to get some defense logic. So we need to invest more in climate and, if you like, environment defense. And one of the instruments is nature restoration or nature-based solutions. And if you have a legal framework, that will certainly help you.
I will try to be quick, but I would like to paraphrase the biologist O.E. Wilson and his concept of environmental bottleneck, because at the moment we are really finding ourselves in a place where the window of opportunities for sustainable and, or better say, livable future is really diminishing quickly. And at the moment, we really have to concentrate and develop efforts to bring as much nature and biodiversity through this contested bottleneck. And the faster, the better for us and for nature and for our capacity to become more climate resilient. I would definitely also advocate for more intersectoral cooperation and the effort to bring literally everyone on board. Environmental issues might divide society at the moment, but I very much hope that in the future it will become a bottom line that will bring people together if we manage to overcome certain, or if we manage to build again the trust in, in the policy and governance processes that were shaken at the moment. And I frankly don't know what will happen with the nature restoration law, but we still have target 2 of the GBF. We still have EU biodiversity strategy and its restoration targets. So we really have to use the momentum and keep the ambitions high, both in the on the EU, but also on the global level, and focus on the implementation on the ground as soon as possible, because these because next 5 or 10 years will be really decisive in terms of our future.
A huge thanks to my panel and to you all for asking such brilliant questions. The additional questions, we still really appreciate them because it helps in our thinking, and this discussion is not ended, so I want you all to go to coffee now and carry on talking about climate resilience and the nature restoration law. Thank you all very much.
We have now. Vous connaissez bien depuis longtemps, mais ça va faire du boulot. Une adaptation en particulier, parce que toujours atténuation, atténuation. Sur la mesure de la vulnérabilité.